Welcome to the Life's Best Medicine podcast, where we are finding hope and healing one episode at a time. No appointment needed, no rubber gloves, and no copay. Just a healthy dose of life lessons to help equip you for this wild journey we call life. Hey everyone, this is a friendly reminder that we are here for entertainment purposes only. We may not even be that entertaining at times, but this is not medical advice. Talk to your doctor, check with your healthcare professionals before making any lifestyle changes or medicine changes. What we're talking about is our clinical experience and what we've seen. And so if you really want our advice, you can consult us. You can actually consult me as a doctor, or you can consult my guest and get all your questions answered. But we can't give free medical advice because we can't pay our bills with that, but we can help to educate you a bit and allow you to think a little bit. And always reach out to your medical professional before making any lifestyle changes. Thank you.
Discover a new path to wellness at Arizona Metabolic Health. Dr. Brian Lenskis offers advanced medicine and personalized care, treating the root causes of your health concerns, not just the symptoms. Whether you're seeking direct primary care, effective diabetes management, or medical weight loss, with a holistic approach, our team is here to guide you every step of the way. Visit ArizonaMetabolicHealth.com today to learn more about our innovative health solutions.
Hello, everyone. Can you believe it's August? This year's flown by. I can't believe it's August. We're getting, the end of summer. Kids, sorry, you're going to have to go back to school pretty soon, but enjoy your last days of freedom while you can. And everyone, I just want to take this opportunity to let you know on September 6th, I'm going to be speaking at a free community conference in Prescott, Arizona at Yavapai College. And we're going to have some great people there, nutritionists. We're going to have people who do red light therapy and just educate us on how to keep our brain healthy as we get older. It becomes more important every year as these years fly by. So I will put a link to the flyer in the show notes, but it will be at Yavapai College from 9:30 in the morning till 1:30. And that just brings up another point that our sponsor of this podcast, Health Code, Get Health, GETHLTH.com. They're great people. They've supported me on all my medical mission trips and community events, and they're sending samples out to Prescott, Arizona. So you'll have free samples if you want to come listen to us yammer on for a little while. But thank you, Health Code, for making that possible. They have great chocolate macadamia and vanilla flavor, and we're going to blend it up right there so you can have some good stuff while you're learning and you can nourish your brain. I'm really happy to be partnering with them because the garbage they're giving our seniors right now, our parents, it's unbelievable with seed oils and processed stuff and sugar. And Health Code gives us another option. So look them up, support them, and they're doing great stuff in the community. So please continue to support them. And we thank you for your continued support. Hello, and welcome back to the Life's Best Medicine podcast. I have the king of the Ruminati here, Dr. Peter Ballerstedt, the Sodfather. I have to kiss the ring every time he comes on, but Doc, good to have you. This is the expert on everything bovine.
Well, we want to be careful with that a little bit. Brian, it's great to see you. Thank you for the time. So for those who don't know, Peter Ballerstedt, I'm a forage agronomist, I'm a ruminant nutritionist, and I've been trying to connect communities that I'm a part of. So for the last 15 years or so, I've been a part of what I call metabolic health community. So starting with low carb in late aughts, I guess is how we're supposed to refer to it now. And then continuing forward, starting in 2010, I started speaking publicly. Basically, the message is that public health will be harmed by further reductions in animal source food availability and consumption, number one. Number two, there can be no sustainable food systems without livestock in general and ruminants in particular. And number three is that these animal source foods are part of our culture and tradition, regardless of where those come from, right? So there are these very modern ideas of what constitutes a healthy diet that have not been present in our history until very recently. So, with that kind of a background, I came to the metabolic health community with the background in ruminant animal agriculture. Ruminants are cows, sheep, goats, deer, bison, buffalo. There's many, many different wild and domestic species. And what I found was there was information that I was being exposed to in both communities that I thought the other communities would benefit from learning about. And it's been my great pleasure to have people like you come to events like the National Grazing Lands Conference in Tucson last December. And that was just one of the pleasures that I get by introducing my colleagues and friends to each other.
Yeah, it's amazing. That was amazing, and thank you again for the invite. Because being there, you meet all the ranchers, and they think they're like almost ashamed sometimes, saying like, worried about heart disease and all that. So when we gave our talk on metabolic, like some of these guys were almost in tears, like, oh my goodness, I never knew these things. And so, it was so amazing. And the other thing that really struck me is how, people are showing how the environment's getting better by what they're doing. The cows going in and they figure it out, and it's the science behind it. I thought there were just a bunch of ranchers. You have cows, and every once in a while you move them around. But when you start seeing the technology they're using to keep the livestock healthy and also to provide a product for everyone.
Hmm. And more services than merely the food, which clearly is critical, but all of the benefits, we call them ecosystem services, how the watersheds benefit, how fire suppression takes place, wildlife diversity can exist along with this primary industry, and in many cases is benefited by proper management. So those are the sorts of things that I've been exposed to for most of my adult life. And then to have that opportunity to sort of stand back and watch you interact with people like the virtual fencing people next. I have a poor photo of that, which it's just in my private collection. So those sorts of things. But then what I found over time is that there's sort of this circular reasoning at work that we're sort of pushing against. Maybe we don't realize it, but that circular reasoning goes, well, this is the diet that's healthy for people, and therefore that's the diet, that's the food systems that we ought to have because they'll be better for the environment. Like we're having environmental conversations based on dietary guidelines, and we're having dietary guidelines that are based on environmental concepts. And they're both flawed, but they're mutually reinforcing. And so part of what I hope to do is be able to provide at least an introduction to a body of evidence on both sides that says those things are flawed. And then the thing that we need to sort of next step, and we talked about it in Tucson, is how does our concept of malnutrition impact these conversations? And too often we find obesity classed in the subcategory of malnutrition called overnutrition. And that, to me at least, implies that they're believing that obesity is the result of overeating and or sedentary behavior, right? And calories in, calories out. And okay, that's one theory, but on the other side, we have a metabolic health theory that would say that obesity is another manifestation of metabolic derangement. And so let's take it up a level in the definition and say this is malnutrition, period. And let's define malnutrition as any diet that evokes a metabolic derangement. And now you take the impact, it's a factor of 10 increase in the number of deaths every year due to malnutrition. And then we can begin to look at those aspects of sustainability that they were talking about in Tucson, where, okay, we need to look at societal impacts and economic impacts as well as environmental impacts. And there's more environmental impacts than merely enteric methane emissions.
Yeah, and that's a big point. I think a lot of people say, look, I just want to do the right thing. I want to make sure the animals are taken care of, And because of you, when I'm in Arizona, I found a local rancher, met the guy, we talked, I see how he treats his animals, and I go, okay, when do you have the next cow coming up, right? It's not shipped across the country, it's not frozen, and like, all these things that people don't realize how much it costs to ship all these fruits and vegetables from Nicaragua or
Mhm.
Venezuela up to San Diego. And so when you start seeing the environment impact, you start realizing, gosh, I mean, we could do better. I mean, there's so much that we do and we just don't even think about it.
Well, and indeed, and part of what I've been exploring is, so what is so we're going to assume that the majority of chronic illness, which is the majority of our healthcare burden, and this is global, not merely in affluent North America, we're going to assume that the majority of that is chronic illness, and that chronic illness is largely the result of malnutrition. And
Yeah,
I,
and that's what we like when you're thinking obesity is a problem of overnutrition. One of the things I remember I was doing preparing a talk, and so people were talking about, oh yeah, red meat's going to kill you, but they'll sit down and eat a bag of Lay's potato chips, and I think it's like 2,800 calories. I'm like, in order to get the same amount of calories from beef, you'd have to have like 9 8-ounce ribeye. I knew the math at the time. I was like, that would be no one would eat that much and then say, let's go out to dinner. But you could eat a bag of chips watching the football game and then go out and have a huge dinner afterwards too.
yeah, I think it would be better for us to focus on the nutrients we're trying to, obtain rather than the caloric, right? But I think that overfed and undernourished is a concept we're all familiar with, or should be, that we're eating lots of items and not obtaining the essential nutrients that we need, which may have an impact on ingestive behavior. We see evidence of that in livestock, so it's not unreasonable. But let's take a step back and say, okay, so if the majority of our healthcare burden is the result of malnutrition, that's arguably avoidable if we could provide proper nutrition, right? If we could provide a diet that is appropriate to the species, however you want to describe that.
And you were
And
the first one I heard really picking up on this too and saying, okay, if we're eating a terrible diet, what's the environmental impact on the pharmaceutical industry as far as making insulin, making all these drugs and the packaging and, all the time they send out samples in this huge box from FedEx and there's all this waste and it's like 3 pills in there. You're like, what is this? Or a big, huge bottle with hardly anything in it. You go, this is a ton of waste. I mean,
well,
eating healthier where you don't need all that stuff would probably help things out a bit.
well, and yeah, the quality of those byproducts are different, right? But it just also, if you start looking at the emissions from the healthcare industry treating malnutrition related chronic illnesses, you come up with an emissions amount that's roughly equivalent to the global cattle. Okay, so let's have a conversation now about global systems. And then there's many other things that need to be in this. What's the cost? It's trillions of dollars a year. What what's the impact on human beings, right? What's the societal impact of diminished lives, shortened lifespans, less vitality? And then there's some other things.
Or
Clear,
again, and also, yeah, the health span not equaling the lifespan. So a lot of people in their late 60s, early 70s are staring at a wall somewhere, and and the more we're around with metabolic mind, a lot of like Dr. Matthew Phillips down in New Zealand doing some great work, you're realizing, man, we can a lot of these processes, we can at least prevent them, if not reverse some of them. And so you
yeah,
start looking through nutrition, and as a matter of fact, you'll be interested in this. And I don't know the answer. I'm just saying it's an observation I made. I was in Guatemala in a very underserved area, and so people are coming in normal weight, and maybe a little 5 pounds overweight, maybe something like that, and their sugars are 500, 350, 600, and you're like, what the world is this? And they're asymptomatic. They're not like, are you peeing all the time? Blurry, a little blurry vision, these kind of things. So, anyways, the doctors down there were insisting that if we give the diabetics milk, whole milk, their sugars drop. I go, there's tons of sugar in milk. It doesn't make sense. And they go, well, I don't know if it makes sense. They understand metabolic health, and they're like, we're seeing it. We don't know why, but we see it. There's something
Mm,
in milk that does this. I'm like, okay, I'll do one better. Health Code, who sponsors this podcast, so I could talk about it. I had it with me down there, and I had this lady. Her sugar was 546, and I said, let's give you a Health Code shake and just see what it does. Because she said, oh, that's going to make my sugars go high. I go, let's see. An hour later, we rechecked her with no meds or any intervention. It was 280. Another guy. So I only had enough for like 5 people because I gave them some to take home with them. But I go, look, like all the least amount of drop I had was 50 points, and so I was intrigued by that. So I went back and I said, what nutritional deficiency causes diabetes? And it was chromium, magnesium. There was a whole list of them. I'm like, Health Code has all those in it. So
mm,
maybe it's the short chain fatty acids that's coming up. Maybe maybe it's just binding some of the sugar in the gut. I don't know why, and I suspect that a lot of them, because of malnutrition, are not making enough insulin. It's not that they're super insulin resistant, but their diet's
mm,
not great either. But and I do see down there for sure that the poorly controlled diabetics, when I ask them like, what are you putting in your, because everyone eats black beans down there. I go, what do you mix in your black beans? How do you cook them? And they go, oh, vegetable oil only.
oh,
The ones with good control, they're embarrassed and they go, I use lard. I'm sorry.
yeah,
I'll
yeah,
change that. I go, no, keep it. You're doing better than this guy over here who's using the seed oils all the time. So it is pretty
mm,
amazing when you see it in a population.
sure. And to touch on the point that I think is a feature this year with the neurological conversation at the Metabolic Health Symposium. Um, we have organizations that are referring to animal source foods as brain foods, right? But they're looking at the early stages of human development, recognizing that if pregnant, pre-pregnant, pregnant, lactating women aren't getting the right nutrition, then they're developing babies, and then young children don't develop their brains properly. And that's a condition that lasts for the rest of their life. And so now we have that development phase. Can we get them aware of the work in the metabolic psychiatry and say, yes, it's brain food. It's when we feed the organism properly, the organism functions better. And then part of this, I'll try not to make this one too long, but it shows the assumptions. So you'll find many predictions about what we need to do to meet the needs of the world of 2050. And I've done it. I have a list and I'll probably use the slide. Part of it includes the assumption that there'll be a 2/3 increase in demand for animal source protein by 2050. Okay, now part of that is to feed an enlarging population, right? Part of it is also assumed because as these societies become more prosperous, they can afford more animal source foods and then they will buy them because they want them. Okay, I have a brain that says, yeah, but is it always that relationship, or does the availability of animal source food contribute something that fosters economic development? And we have at least the example of colonial North America, where we had impoverished people, Europeans, coming over. They suddenly had much greater access to fish and fowl, domestic and wild, and they ate lots of it. We have the records, contemporary records of visitors coming over and going, oh my God, you're eating a lot of meat, fish, and fowl at every meal, and you're eating 3 meals a day, and it's amazing. And then within a generation or so, their children were several inches taller than they were. And increased height is a marker for increased strength. It's a marker for increased productivity. Forgive the dog making comments. That's Connor. So I'm not saying that that's the case in every case, but if people would understand that this could be a fundamental part of increasing prosperity as we think about a developing world, then that shifts conversations quite a bit, because we still have people who are saying, well, this is your fault because you're too prosperous. right? Like only the prosperous were and attain a notion like that, right? Only the comfortable and affluent and the
Well, and
children of
that's
them.
and there's some truth in a way. Like when I'm in Guatemala, like you talk to a red meat, they look at you like they're out there in the middle of nowhere. They're like, red meat's a luxury. Like you don't just get red meat, but eggs, if they start eating eggs, or they can grow their own chickens. And so a lot of the churches will do that. People are very poor, and they go, look, we're going to give you like 5 chickens, and then when you get once you breed those chickens, then give us 5 chickens back, and we'll give them to someone else and help them. And so they could do these. You could see the improvement in health. I could see it year to year in communities who are at least having a good protein source.
Hmm. And of course, we need to understand. Yeah. So even that, it's more than merely protein, right? And many others have spoken about this, yourself and others, that it is a package of essential nutrients in forms best utilized by humans. But then we need to say, so back to the idea of people eating, 18 cups of broccoli to get the same amount of essential amino acids that they would get from like a 4 ounce piece of cooked sirloin. I mean, it's ludicrous. Um, and yet people will still say things like that. And in many cases, it's because they've been misinformed. So can
So what do you
we?
think in a perfect world? Do you think it's the education of people? How do we change our mindset right now? Because the mindset is, okay, if you eat red meat, you're gonna have a heart attack and die, like, and you're ruining the environment. So how do we intervene on that and go, look, here's the reality? Guys like you, I love you because you have such an even temperament, right? You can say stuff and make people think. Other people, they may get more guarded and argue with you more. But I've seen the only time I saw someone really get really upset with you is when he said, "Yeah, there's not much difference between grass fed and grain fed when you're from a health perspective." And people lost their mind. I mean, like 3 or 4 people coming. Can you believe he said that? I'm like, well, he's the expert. I think he knows probably better than me. I don't know. Maybe we could talk about that a little bit too, or whatever.
Sure.
I don't want to get you too far off track, but
Well,
there's a
no,
lot of on both sides. There's a lot of like legalism there.
yes, and that's I think gets us back to human nature, right? There's something about us once, and you and I need to guard against it all the time as well, right? We know what we know, and that's based on our experience and who's taught us and all of that. And then if when um, new information comes along, how do we accept that? How do we evaluate that and then move on? If an honest man is shown to be in error, he either ceases to be in error or he ceases to be honest. And that's on my board, so I can look at it. So it's a challenge to me. Now, I understand how people got to where we are, I think, or at least open to that. I'm also aware of a lot of the conversations that have occurred over the last half century that have gotten us to where we are. And so right now I'm working on a part of a paper where I'm just trying to say, as we're considering all these questions about what our grazing systems ought to be, let us be aware of the controversies that exist over here in the human nutrition realm, right? And let's be sure that we're not bringing in the errors from those other disciplines into our own as we're doing our work. I think the most important thing is affordable, accessible, appropriate animal source foods for people to have in their diet. And so that cuts across all income levels, right? And the I am convinced that humanity's existential crisis is insufficient animal source food in their diets. And we can look across. There's some things that I like to look at as markers, other people's work. One paper said, if you're not getting 50%, at least 50% of your dietary protein from animal source foods, you're likely not meeting your non-protein nutrient requirements. So there's a marker. And another marker said if you're getting less than 30% of your calories from animal source foods, in populations where that's true, we see rapidly increasing numerous micronutrient deficiencies. Okay, Well, if you look at those two, that's 60 to 70% of humanity falls within that kind of, they're getting less than 30% of calories from animal source food, and or less than 50% of their dietary protein is coming from animal source foods. So this is what we're looking at. And yet at the same time, I'm hearing people defending the current food systems saying, well, look at what a good job we're doing. Look at how many fat people there are. Right. So they're making that implicit assumption that obesity is the result of overeating and or sedentary behavior. Okay, it's built on a flawed premise. So how do we get people to see that? Then the whole conversation about the value of different animal source foods based on different production systems is sort of a way around this. Since we know that red meat is bad, give me a form of red meat that's less bad. Oh, okay, good. Now I have something that I can justify eating red meat, right? And when you look at the evidence, certainly when you look at population sort of approaches, then you have to say, well, how serious is this evidence? Or are they looking, so I've seen through the literature, it has less fat. That's supposed to be a good thing. Or, this has more of this antioxidant, which is assumed to be a good thing. And so we need to always remember that we can measure exquisitely small differences in small amounts of something. So the quantitative differences are not in dispute. What I question is their biological significance. And so if all I do is I take somebody who's on a standard American diet and I swap out, their Safeway hamburger for, organic, grass-fed, and then whatever other monikers you want to put on it. But that's the only difference I make? Am I going to see a difference? And then I look at people like Finney or Eads or Westman, forgive the, never mind. These are amazing people who have done amazing work for more than a quarter century. And then you can look at the literature of people who did things before them and realize those label claims are not required. Now, some people say that it is for them, and okay, that's your experience. I'm not arguing with you. But we have clear evidence that it's not a requirement for most people. And so it's probably, we're in the 80-20 thing, like let's get 80% of the way there, and then maybe we need to tweak it because of individual realities. But for the most part, I don't want people to be raising any barriers to adoption and telling people they have to buy something that's not even in their market or is more expensive, right? That's something that's going to block the adoption. And part of my mission is to increase adoption, right? Multiply the personal experiences, because we know what happens when we have personal experiences.
What's the limiting reagent here? Where's the bottleneck for as far as having ranchers growing cows, raising cows, and people consuming cows? Is it supply and demand? Is that why beef is more expensive to raise it? Is it just because they're limited on how big their ranch can be, things like that?
Well, yes,
Or is the
we've
demand not
had,
there? I mean, I just don't know why is beef so much more expensive than like a good, grass-fed beef would be so much more expensive than getting chicken, for instance.
yeah. So one is just the cost of production.
Mhm.
Um, uh, and recently we've had droughts in the United States that led to a reduction in herd size. And so, okay, it's more expensive. The animals, you have a lower supply of them. The demand remains good, which is why price is high. And it's the biological differences, right? So if I have a cow that's bred today, it's not but 9 months until the calf comes. And then it's about 2 years before that assumed steer goes to, is in the market versus chickens. or fish or swine. So your turnover cycle, your reproductive cycle is much shorter in those other species. Now, on the other side, you have people who say things like, well, the cows are the least efficient converters of feed into meat compared to others. But the problem there is they look at total dry matter consumed to pounds of meat out versus how much of that feed was human utilizable in the first place. And when you look at it on a human utilizable food in to human utilizable food out, in some cases they're actually slightly better than poultry and swine. So those sorts of things, you do have the issue of these animals being born in one region and then moving to another to be finished because the environment where they were born would not support the complete enterprise, right? That's how these systems have evolved in the United States.
And
And
do you think in your experience, because I've always noticed if I go down to Mexico or Guatemala, when I see a cow, they're not fat cows like we have here. They're different. I don't know if it's the breed. They have all the access to grass to eat, and then you say, well, how much of it is antibiotics and chemicals and things they're doing to stimulate it? Because when I was in Cuba, it was a learning experience. I actually met a couple ranchers, and not ranchers, but chicken ranchers, and I asked them. They said, look, in the United States, you guys, they were giving me the numbers I can't remember, but they were saying your chickens, like they're giving so many chemicals that they mature so much faster. Here it takes this many days until that chicken's ready to eat, and yours is like a third of that time or something like that.
yeah, so there's a question of genetics, right? So not all cows are created equal.
Mm-hmm.
Even though there's lots of grass, the grass may not be nutritious enough to support the full genetic potential in the animals that they do have. And so when we look globally, we realize that the most impactful thing we can be doing to reduce environmental impact is appropriate adoption of technology to increase efficiency
Uh-huh.
in the livestock. So the example that I point to, not to be judgmental, it's just a fact. Brazil has 3 times the cattle that we do, but they produce less beef. Now that's genetics, that's nutrition, that's herd health, right? If we could
Is
something
it less
like
beef because the cow, like, is it the same number of cows? Like
no, they
they're all
have
going.
3 times the cows.
Yeah, but I mean, they may be smaller cows, and we have big cows. So you have two of our cows equals six of their cows type thing.
That may play a part, but it in some cases we've kind of gone. A lot of industries go through cycles, and the beef industry went into a cycle of producing very large cows. In the theory that that would produce bigger calves that would produce more weight and greater profit. And they're kind of coming back from that because they're realizing a bigger cow takes more to keep it and maintain it. And you can get a bigger calf by other actions than having a large maternal um, mature size. But it's things like if you don't have the reproductive efficiency so that that cow is not giving you a calf every year, then it takes more cows to give you a given number of calves. And if you have a lack of feed to support the growth potential of that animal, then it's going to take longer for that animal to get to market size. Well, now we've just increased the environmental footprint based on those two criteria. And then you could look at something like 20% of the global meat produced every year is lost due to animal diseases. And so veterinary medicine being more widely deployed across the globe would reduce impacts and increase supply. One example that I came across from one estimate said current rate of global vaccination for cattle for any disease, and there's a number of diseases that that's the requirement for, is around 40% of the global cattle herd ever gets vaccinated for something. They said if they could just take it from 40 to 60%, it would double beef production. And there was recently an FAO estimate that said of all the available approaches to reducing emissions from global livestock to achieve the stated goal that people have agreed on, the least impactful is personal dietary choices.
Mhm.
So, so we are focusing on exactly the wrong things for any number of reasons in the name of achieving some goal, which it won't do when you look at the evidence. And then we get back to, no, it doesn't cause heart disease. No, it doesn't cause diabetes. No, it doesn't cause cancer. No, and so what are you left with? You're left with this circular reasoning, as I mentioned before. So what I hope I can contribute to the community is sources of information that when your patient says, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but what about? There's reliable information that you can go to or direct them to
Yeah, and it doesn't
say,
have to be an emotional fight. People are super emotional about this. Instead of going, look, here's the data, here's the facts. You can decide for yourself. So that's what you're good at doing, is saying, look, here it is. You may think one thing, but for me, there's so much we don't know. But I think most people are saying, look, I want my if it's raised humanely and it's having a good life and it's out there doing its thing, and then that we have a cycle of life, then I think most people say, yeah, I'm comfortable with that. But if they're the big thing was people, and I know you've addressed this too, where they pen up all the animals together in one place, and but there's reasons for that too. There's not It's not being cruel to the animals, it's understanding how the process works.
yeah. And the if we can understand, well, here's the estimate. So what is the emission intensity of the global pharmaceutical industry? And people have made those estimates. Good morning.
Your dogs agree.
Yeah. And what we now can say is, based on those estimates, and looking at the average, the pharmaceutical consumption by the average adult American that has type 2 diabetes. And if we say, if the average adult American with type 2 diabetes could eliminate their medication use, again, let's just speculate wildly. Let's just assume that such a thing is even possible, right? I'm being sarcastic.
Yeah, we know it is because we see it every day.
But many people don't know that.
Yeah.
But if they could do that, that would result in a reduction in their carbon footprint 29% more than if they shifted from a high meat to a vegan diet. Okay, let's talk about impacts and sustainability. What is the ability to, be part of your grandchildren's life and active, right? And that intergenerational thing. And one of my messages to the ranching community is many of those businesses are multi-generational businesses. So what would that be worth?
Yeah, and we
And
know. I mean, Ben Pacicchio, and I've looked at the data because I was questioning him on it, but the data is clear. The more muscle mass you have, the longer you live, right? If you have sarcopenia as a senior, you're in trouble. Most seniors don't eat enough protein. I just saw an article today that just said, uh, that they were worried that if kids eat too much protein, they're going to have kidney failure. It's like, go to a dialysis center,
yeah,
see how many bodybuilders you see at the dialysis center,
yeah,
and get back to me and let me know if you see one somewhere in the world, because
yeah.
it's a vast majority of diabetes and metabolic derangement that's causing the kidney failure. It's not having too much muscle mass.
Well, I think it was Mike Eads that has the zombie myth. That's where I got that from. And yeah, these things just won't kill. They won't die, right? They just keep stumbling around. Um, and yeah, we don't even, the dietary guidelines, this is something else that I've been pointing out to people. Since 2010, at least, the dietary guidelines have stated that not only are their recommended eating patterns not tested for health benefits, but they're not intended for the treatment of disease. And
Yeah.
and so that's a message people need to hear. And so if we're
And
in,
I mean, the other message you have to have that goes with that is we've been following the food pyramid, right? And 93% of us are metabolically sick. So if
yeah,
93% of people fail the test, you go, either it's a bad test or everyone is really not following, not studying.
well, and yeah, indeed. And then you'll have people argue about, well, they're not really following, right? And of course, there's evidence that contradicts that. But just to kind of foster the greatest conversation for the longest period of time, okay, that's your healthy diet pattern. You're saying that if you eat that way, you won't get sick. Now, I say, what they're saying is eat this way, you won't get sick, but if you get sick, don't eat this way. Right?
Yeah.
Now, but okay, so let's accept that there's a difference between a healthy diet, I put air quotes around that, and a therapeutic diet. And so okay, you can continue to promote your healthy diet to the 12 or 7% of the adult population that's still healthy.
But don't make it a
But
national guideline if a vast majority of the people don't fit into that.
we obviously need a different dietary approach for the majority of Americans because they're not healthy. And then we need to understand that this is a global issue. That the chronic illness pandemic, epidemic, whatever the right term is a global issue. Far more people die every year from chronic illness than from infectious diseases.
Yeah, and just like you're talking about the pharmaceutical with all the processed food, it we have huge plants. When you see how things are made, you go, yeah, I don't think I'm eating that anymore. Even the fake crab, like how they make it, you go, yeah, I don't think so. Right? And
Yeah.
why
And yeah,
is
it's part of the challenge is also to recognize and this gets us a little off topic, but I take electricity for granted, right? And having affordable, reliable electricity is a requirement for a modern society. And when we're talking about the production, processing, distribution of animal source foods, it becomes increasingly so because they're more perishable, right? I mean, grains, hell, we could put them in a basket and
you
put
put them
it
in a
on
silo
somebody's
for
head, right?
forever? Yeah.
And have them as long as you keep the rodents out.
Apples. I mean, it's crazy. People tell me stories about that are in the industry, and they go, "Yeah, we have bananas or apples that sit there for like a year before they go to the
Well, right.
market."
That's environmental controls that they figured out how to manage the gas composition, and they do
Yeah,
the
and then they
same thing
spray
with
it, and then they go, "Okay,
potatoes.
take it to the store." You're like,
Well,
"Wow, this is
otherwise, everybody harvests the same crop at the same time, right? But they do the same thing with lobsters in no in the Northeast
Alaska."
and
Yeah.
maritime. Well, I was thinking more of the Atlantic
Oh,
lobster,
Atlantic. Yeah.
and so they will capture, because they have a limited season that they can go out and harvest in. They bring them back. They go into, I forget the right word for it, but it's like a cooperative area where they have very cold seawater, and they basically put these animals into suspended animation for long periods of time, and that then evens out the supply. So you don't get the glut that
Wow.
drives down the price. And then this, at the end you have none, and so the price goes up. And so it is a tool for improving the profitability of the farmers, right? The sustainability of the farmers or the fishermen or whoever. So some of this kind of ingenious, what was it? I learned a long time ago that if you just take an apple and you stick it in a bag with green tomatoes, the tomatoes will turn red. because of the ethylene gas that is naturally
Mhm.
produced by the apple in the ripening process, then triggers the ripening process in the tomatoes.
Mhm.
So, you know, it's a wonderful, it's a dynamic system. We benefit from it, but because of misinformation and many other factors, we're not taking advantage of it, right? We could have the greatest access, right? We could be like the European colonists with access to affordable, appropriate, right, animal source foods in quantities that many parts of the world would envy and would aspire to, and we would see the benefits, I would argue, in our health. Unfortunately, we also are exposed to marketing that tells us that this is healthier than that, and so you want our fat-free cookies, you want our fat-free yogurt with jam on the bottom. I'm sorry, fruit. We have various organizations that, for philosophical reasons, are promoting, right?
Well, because
So,
they know that's what people are going to buy. If I tell people to eat plain Greek yogurt, they're like, "Can I have the vanilla one?" Yeah, look at the carbs in that. Look at the plain.
yeah,
And so, they're marketing because they know people like the fruit on the bottom. And they go, "Is that healthy?" Well, I'm eating yogurt, so I'm healthy. It's like, well, look at the nutritional value you're eating. And so,
yeah,
so many of us have been snowed. Like, I mean, one of the ones that we see all the time is people go, "I just had coffee, and that's all I had this morning." And look at my sugars went crazy. I go, "What'd you put in your coffee?" And it'll be International Delight, one of those type of things. You're like, holy cow, it's seed oils, and and so I think one of the for us, and it's I don't think it's controversial, but people make it controversial, is having a continuous glucose monitor, and you can
mhm,
see how you respond to these different foods. You eat a steak, like I showed the ranchers. You have sushi, and you look at your continuous glucose monitor, insulin
yeah,
response if you're overweight, and that's what we all struggle with. And you have a steak, zero, flat, doesn't do anything. And you have eggs, flat, doesn't do anything. You have oatmeal, straight up, stays up, comes down. You get low sugar, you're hungry again. So when people realize that, they're blown away because they're like, I thought that was like, how could all these big organizations be wrong? How can the food pyramid be wrong when it's the standard of care?
yeah,
And you go,
yeah, yeah.
it's not
So
working,
when I
clearly.
don't know, in 2008, I read Good Calories, Bad Calories, and my first reaction was, I got pissed off. And then, okay, get over that, figure out something more useful. So in addition to the presentation that I'll get to give in San Diego, I'll get to give a poster. And what I've been doing is, to get back to the time that you graciously gave us a day, which, pointing out to people, we just had a physician give us a day. Do you understand how important that is? And they do. They really appreciated it. Um, I call it Operation Grassroots. Right. There are people working in all aspects of this, at the government level, whatever, and all for it. I'm looking for ways to multiply the personal experiences. I'm looking for ways to reach other non-medical professional audiences. Right, we have these natural communities of people, like in mine, the National Grazing Land Coalition, or the American Society of Animal Science, or the American Forage and Grassland Council, and the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. All these organizations are natural communities. How can the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners move in their advocacy realm into those spaces to educate and to build bridges? One of my concerns is, I'm just one guy, right?
Well, and
How do we
and
how do
yeah.
we multiply? How do we increase the number of people who are trying to make these bridge connections between metabolic health and ruminant animal agriculture?
Yeah, and just being there, I mean, one of the amazing thing is the education we give because some of the ranchers there were morbidly obese diabetic, and they go, I don't eat the meat, I just grow it. I'm like, well, what are you having for breakfast? Oh, I'm just having whole wheat pancakes and syrup and you're like, oh my gosh, and orange juice and all that. And you start and when you tell them, hey, why don't you and some of the guys go, hey, I made that change a year ago and my diabetes is gone. I feel great. And then they're an example to their community too. So it's amazing. You have what can help you right under your nose and you don't do it because you've watched the news or the View or something like that. They gave you your nutritional advice.
And what's it like to work in an industry where you're being vilified because people are convinced that you're killing people and you're destroying the environment? Well, you can see, you know, how many people work in an industry where it's been in the same place for 6 generations?
Yeah, that's why I was blown away because I saw how much they care. I'm like, you guys are sitting there for like 3 hours talking about how to preserve land. Like, I don't know, it's like to me, it's like outside my world. But the questions and how important it was to people. They're thinking, how do I get my land better? I can help you. Like, how the ranchers want to help each other and say, hey, I'll show you how I'm doing it. Like, here's how I rotate my cattle. And so they want to help other ranchers. They want to help people to be successful, even though it's a competition too. But if you're in Oklahoma and I'm in Texas, I mean, we're probably not going to be a heck of a lot of competition locally, right?
Well,
Well, maybe not. Maybe they are.
yeah, I mean, community is a real thing when you're hours away from, a major city. Um, when you depend on your neighbors. And
Mhm.
so and the community, the structures. And again, how can we find ways to tap into those existing systems to get more information about metabolic health to people who can apply it? And especially in my interest, those people are people in ruminant animal agriculture. I'm sure there are people in other industries that could take the same example and apply
Yeah.
it within their communities outside of the metabolic health community. And we're talking about people in many cases who have advanced degrees.
Well, plus
Uh,
the
yeah.
other advantage of bringing these groups together is the people in this community are looking for the product that you're making. You have
Well,
you right? If you have a local rancher next to you, you're like, oh my gosh, someone who's low carb keto carnivore, they're like, oh yeah, I want to know that rancher pretty well.
yeah. So making those connections, finding ways to multiply the personal experience, make sure people know where they can go for information to support them as they're, undertaking this.
Yeah, and maybe you
Um,
can send some of those links because I know you have a lot of great resources that I've used too. So yeah, just send me any of those links. We'll put them in the show notes so people can track
Absolutely.
down local ranchers in their neighborhood, how they get involved, and go listen to some of the meetings. There's so many things you can do to get involved too.
Absolutely. Happy to do that. That's kind of what I've been about for the last several years. Brian, it's great to talk with you. I'm looking forward to San Diego and seeing you there. What are you
Yeah,
doing there?
what's it? Well, I may upset you, Peter. I'm not sure. I'm actually talking. My talk is on the gut microbiome and how diet affects that. And so, no, it's actually very interesting to me. And I'm seeing a lot of amazing data. It's funny because I talked about 3 years ago, and one of the leaders in the low carb community who you mentioned earlier said, hey, you can't talk about this stuff. There's no data. And so I was like, okay, let me go look on PubMed. Oh, there's 80,000 studies in the last 10 years that have been released. And you go, I think there's some data there. So, anyways, that's kind of saying, hey, should we just eat meat? Is it okay to add in some vegetables? Should we like it's individualized, I think, and it depends on your metabolic health and where you're at. Just like anything, I think we can all agree. It's like not everyone has to be keto, not everyone has to be low carb, not everyone. It depends on so many factors: genetics, lifestyle, stress levels, sleep. All these things. So I'm kind of talking about, like how do we make ourselves if we're trying to be insulin sensitive? How do we do that the best way?
Yeah. And I've tried to make this analogy and it hasn't worked, but there we've been driving towards really poor metrics when it comes to health, right? Weight, total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, right? I mean, what's your BMI and all, and I understand how we got there, but in the dairy industry, we talk about having to we and in beef industry as well, testing hay to determine its feed value. And we spend a lot of time teaching people how to take a accurate sample, a representative sample, and handle it properly and send it to an accredited lab so that you get reliable information. Why do we do that? Well, plant the value of forages varies tremendously according to a number of factors. And so we encourage people to test every lot, LOT, of hay. And a lot is defined as one cutting from one field that's as uniform as possible, same variety, right? Point one, the values that people are tracking for their plant source foods are every bit as variable as that, and yet not represented by the values that they're tracking, right? Some of those variables have a 20% variance allowable. Um, and then we could talk about protein, that's another thing. But talking to a dairyman about, the job he's doing on his hay because it's green. Well, there's a relationship between color and food value, but it's not good enough to balance a ration on. And
Yeah.
there's some relationship between weight and cholesterol levels and health. But it's not as solid as people think, and it's often not in the direction that people are assuming. So we've been driving towards really poor metrics. Now we have better metrics. But how would somebody know that when their physician doesn't know that? Well, how do we encourage the physician to learn, but how do we encourage the patient to learn as well? And so increasing understanding all the way up and down and across this space is an absolutely essential part of increasing adoption.
Yeah, and open communication, talking about things, and I have a question for you may not know the answer to this, but I remember a few years ago, a bunch of cattle just dropped dead. Everyone said, "Was it the heat? What was it?" And did they ever figure out why all these it was like thousands of cattle died, like in Texas or something?
Well, there were a couple things that come to mind. Um, Heat stress is a reality, and if the
Hmm.
animals aren't managed properly, things can go wrong. Um, Also, there was plants produce toxins,
I
and
remember you said that if they eat too much of a certain plant, they get kidney failure and all kinds of crazy stuff can happen, right?
or the plants produce prussic acid, which under right conditions produces cyanide. And
Wow.
so, and then you have nitrate toxicity under some conditions. And so all of
Yeah, so
these are
there's so many
things.
factors. Yeah.
Yeah. So
So it's not necessarily nefarious
lightning
stuff. It's just,
lightning can, wipe out groups
yeah.
of animals that are sheltering in the wrong place. So I'm not sure exactly, but I have no difficulty imagining a
Mhm.
situation.
No,
And
because
I,
and dealing with this stuff. So,
yeah,
Peter, what's life's best medicine for you?
well,
Like, what really matters? What are you going to tell people? Like, here's what really matters. Here's what motivates me. Here's what, ultimately is important.
well, so people say things like, we can't feed the world the kind of diet, Dr. Lenskis, that you're advocating. Just can't do it. Well, there's one universally correct statement. It's true every time it's said, everywhere it's said. It won't work here, right? If you have anything to do with it, you're right. It won't work, but it will work for your neighbor, just right across the fence.
Hmm.
So where's the problem? But people say we can't do this, and I turn that and say we must. If it's true, all of the things that I'll discuss are true, that animal source foods are essential for proper human development, function, and health, and if livestock agriculture is essential for sustainable food system, then it's a moral imperative for us to help each other figure out how to do that on the global scale. And it's not taking North American model and taking it to West Africa. It's not what I'm talking about. But there are things that can be transferred appropriately and help the people there solve the issues that are limiting animal source food production, availability, affordability. So that's number one. Number two is, if you start looking at the burden of these chronic illnesses, and you're talking about human lives being diminished in multiple ways. The work looking at mental health alone, and you start looking at things like, liberating people from possession. And I'm using that in a broad sense, not in any theological sense,
Hmm.
although I'm seeing the theological implications. We're seeing Today, we see somewhere between a fifth and a quarter of children globally, 5 and under, are limited in their lifetime potential because they're not getting the essential nutrients they need for their brains to develop properly. We're seeing women who are the primary victims of the propaganda making what they think are informed choices that end up limiting their health and their lifetime potential because they've been misled, deluded. So all of that speaks to me of the opportunity to help humanity in impactful ways. And then part of the message is as well, when you improve your health, you are improving the world. And
Awesome.
maybe that's the best thing that you could do, right? The most practical thing that you could do is improve your own health.
Yeah, because that's going to impact your neighbors, your friends, your ministry, whatever you do. You want to be able to be healthy and be able to get out there and help other people. I mean, if you're sitting in a wheelchair, it's hard. It's a lot more
Mhm.
challenging to get out and, you know, impact others around you and everything. So great stuff, Doc. So anyone who's more interested, like we'll give you all your links and all that stuff in the show notes too. But I think the San Diego Metabolic Health, Dr. Ballerstedt is going to be speaking there, and that's August 14th to the 17th. And it's going to be worthwhile. You could do it online, and we have a discount code. I think Life's Best Medicine has a discount code, and Low Carb MD, and you get a like 20% off discount. So well worth your time and effort to listen. And if you sign up online, you can listen to it there for forever. I think that if you don't
Mhm.
have time that weekend, is not a good time. You can listen, at your convenience. And excuse me, great speakers, great time. I
And
remember I met,
support the society in all
yeah,
that they're trying to accomplish.
yeah, and we'll put a link in the show notes for that too. And then I met Doc there. He was going in to speak, and I'm like, "Oh, this is my first conference. Are you? Is this your first time too?" He's like, "I'm speaking right now." I was like, "Oh, okay, all right, nice to meet you."
Yeah,
So we've
yeah.
had some fun times over the years, Doc. Great seeing you. Thanks for joining us. And if people want to track you down, how do they find you?
Check out the links that'll be in the show notes. You look for Peter Ballerstedt, you'll find me all over social media, grass-based health. And if you look for ruminati.substack.com.
Awesome, awesome. Blessings to you. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
TikTok.
All right. Thank you for listening to this episode. We greatly appreciate your support. We would greatly appreciate a positive thumbs up on all of the platforms like iTunes and uh, Spotify or wherever you're listening. And we just thank you for our Patreon supporters. We greatly appreciate your help in getting this message out. We think there's a lot of important information. And hopefully this helps you. Have a great day, and thank you for listening, and thank you for your support.